The Republican Party is bigger, stronger, more vibrant, and more united than ever before.
The American people are desperate for change. They're desperate for us to save this country.
I formally declare President Donald J. Trump and JD Vance as the Republican nominees for President and Vice President of the United States.
Hello and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Michael Duffy, Opinions Editor-at-Large here at the Post. Today we're joined by Corey Lewandowski. He's coming to us live from Milwaukee. He's President Trump's former campaign manager and now an advisor to the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Corey, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Tonight, former President Trump will address the convention. As everyone knows, he said he tore up his original speech and is trying to strike a more unifying tone. How come?
Well, you know, Michael, when you have leaders who undergo significant change in America, whether it's the bombing of Pearl Harbor, whether it's Gettysburg, whether it's the 9/11 attacks, or now an attempted assassination on these leaders, what those great leaders all have in common is they try and unify coming out of something like that. And so tonight, I think what you're going to see is a president in Trump who is going to talk about that our best days are still in front of us. That's not to say the Republican Party and Democratic Party don't have differences of which way we want to take the direction of this country. But at the end of the day, while politics is important, the most important thing is being able to come home and see your family at the end of the day. So I think what you're going to see is a conciliatory, unifying President Trump, a very different speech than probably what would have been delivered prior to the assassination attempt on his life last Saturday.
Are you able to talk a little bit more about how he will be conciliatory?
Well, look, I think what the President Trump wants to lay out this evening is the notion that we can do this together, that our best days, like Ronald Reagan said, are still in front of us. We can still be that shining city on the hill. I don't want to give away any of his speech because I know that he has worked very diligently to rewrite that speech, to have an opportunity to talk not just to the people in the arena this evening and not just to the Republicans across this country, but to those independents, those Democrats, those disenfranchised individuals who are tired of the way our country is currently running. And, you know, Michael, one of the big audiences that I'm sure President Trump is going to be speaking to tonight are those independent women, the so-called Nikki Haley voters, the ones who supported her during her campaign. And I thought it was very magnanimous of Ambassador Haley to release her delegates so that Donald Trump could accept those delegates and, by and large, be nominated by acclamation.
You know, you've known President Trump a long time, longer than a lot of people in his circle. Do you have reason to think he's been changed by the events of the last week?
I absolutely think he has been changed. I don't think anybody who's gone through a trauma like that can't be changed. You know, Donald Trump has always been and had this air of invincibility to him, a larger-than-life figure. And millimeters made the difference between him being able to speak tonight to the Republican convention and us planning a funeral. And that's really, if that can't humble a man, I don't know what would. And, you know, Michael, as you watched the convention last night and saw his granddaughter talk about him and him in the audience, you could see the emotion in Donald Trump, something that very few people over the course of the last decade have seen. A Donald Trump who was not just this tough, bravado individual, but a man whose family cares about him very deeply. And the statement that Melania Trump, the former First Lady, put out after the shooting was not about politics. It was about the man she loves, the family man that he is, and what it means to be able to come home at night. And I think you're seeing that in him, and I think you'll see that of him this evening.
You know, nearly a decade ago when you ran his first campaign for president, you and Hope Hicks and the other folks almost, it was really a shoestring operation, and you two almost lived off the land. As you look around the convention, what do you see that you couldn't have imagined last time that particularly you've noted?
Yeah, look, resources, Michael, right? We have a unified Republican Party in 2024. I would have begged for that in 2016. You know, in 2016, I was the chairman of the New Hampshire delegation, as I have been for the last 3 conventions. But in 2016, by RNC rules, I had to cast votes for the individuals who won in New Hampshire or received delegates. So that was Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and others. And, you know, there was this notion in 2016 there was going to be a floor fight, and Ted Cruz was going to challenge Donald Trump for the nomination. Obviously, that didn't happen. But now the difference is the resources, the unification of every wing of the Republican Party, from the far-right MAGA movement to the more moderate left, Nikki Haley delegates. They are unified with Donald Trump because they understand that this election in November is truly a binary choice. It's either Joe Biden's America or it's Donald Trump's America. And whether you were an adversary during the presidential primary process or not, all of them now are supporting President Trump.
Last night we heard JD Vance give his first sort of maiden speech as the vice presidential nominee. How does Vance help Trump broaden the party?
It's very interesting. JD Vance is what I call an American success story. This is a kid who grew up in absolute abject poverty, had the opportunity to join the United States Marine Corps and serve admirably, went to Yale Law School, not because of who his parents were, but in spite of that, and overcoming enormous things to be able to do that. Went out to Silicon Valley, made money, and then went back home and ran for office at 39 years old. So in literally a quarter of a century in this great country, here's a man who went from abject poverty to going to maybe the best law school in America, to serving in his nation's military, and now the Republican nomination for the vice presidency of the United States. And Michael, when you look at his history, people aspire in this great country to be better than where they started. And JD Vance's opportunity to go to states like Virginia, that has a large military veteran population, a state like New Hampshire that doesn't have a full-service VA hospital, and tell them that they have not been forgotten, is an opportunity for us to expand the electoral map. And I think that's what JD brings to this ticket.
Do you think the presidential race is still competitive, Corey?
Absolutely. Michael, no one wins the Super Bowl in October. You have to play every game, you have to play every minute and every down. And look, I think for the last few weeks, the Republicans have had a phenomenal run. But don't forget, we go into the Olympics next week. Then the Democrats have the opportunity to bring their message to the American people. And then we have, when the Democrats are done, about 45 days before the first ballots start being sent out in North Carolina. Nothing should be taken for granted. Anybody who's going to rest on their laurels is a fool at this point. And I think you have to keep your foot on the gas and run right through the tape if you want to be successful.
Having watched former President Trump in 2016 and now watching him this year, what have you seen that you didn't see before in him, simply as a performer or a candidate?
He is exceptionally well-versed in politics now. When he came down that golden escalator, he had never spent a day in Washington, D.C., didn't really know the business of politics. He understands now what it takes, how to communicate on his issues. And more than that, Michael, part of what Donald Trump's real growth has been is his ability to work with people behind the scenes to achieve those results, whether it's Speaker Johnson or it's going to be whoever the next Senate leader is in Congress for the Republicans. Donald Trump was a bit green when he came to Washington, D.C. in the business of politics. Those days are gone. He is now the leader of the party, and it's very, very different than it was in 2016. I wouldn't change 1 minute of the 2016 campaign if I could, but I'll tell you what, I like the spot that we're in today in 2024.
Yesterday, Congressman Adam Schiff of California became the 23rd Democratic lawmaker to publicly urge President Biden to end his reelection bid. Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, if you believe the pundits, and some of them I do and some of them I don't, I heard one of the major media pundits today say they believe Joe Biden is 10 days away from being off the ticket. The Democrats have a real problem right now. For a change, the Republicans are completely unified and the Democrats are basically in a civil war in their own party. We've got almost 24 elected officials calling for Joe Biden to step aside, including, as you mentioned, Adam Schiff and now Chuck Schumer. We've been told, at least the reports are saying, that Nancy Pelosi has indicated to Joe Biden that he can't win the election. And more than that, the donor class, the class of individuals who fund these races, are holding somewhere between $90 and $200 million from support to Joe Biden. So if that all continues to culminate, I think it's going to be very difficult for Joe Biden to stay in the race. He did say if the doctors told him that he needs to get out, he would do that. We now know that Joe Biden has been diagnosed with COVID. I don't know if this is something that he will think would preclude him from continuing to run. But I think the next 2 weeks are going to be critical for the Democratic Party, because if they don't recover by their convention, it will continue to be disarray for them.
your own party was in fairly considerable disarray in 2016 when you were running that campaign. Did the two compare?
You know, I think the difference is as we got closer to the election in 16, the party started to consolidate around Donald Trump. And then, you know, in 16, the Republican Party brought in through Donald Trump those old Reagan Democrats, those Rust Belt Republicans or Democrats who hadn't historically been voting for the Republicans. And obviously, Donald Trump won Michigan. He won Ohio. He won Wisconsin. You know, not the case in 2020. The question is, what are the Democrats going to do to go take back that blue wall of Pennsylvania, a must-win state for probably either party? And then if the Republicans have the opportunity to be on the offense, to expand the map, right now the state of Maine looks like it's in play, if you believe the public polling data. You know, how do the Democrats consolidate their base, which is so divided right now, and bring in those independents in order to put a coalition together to win? It is a difficult task with less than 4 months to go.
If Kamala Harris, the vice president, were to lead the ticket, the Democratic ticket, in a few weeks, how should Trump adjust his strategy?
Well, look, I think it's going to really understand of Kamala Harris, just because she potentially is the Democratic nominee, doesn't get to forget or erase the time that she has served under the Biden administration. She's completely tied to that. And so us to continue to remind the American people of our unsecure southern border, the fentanyl crisis, the human trafficking, and the devastation that has occurred from our military with the terrible Afghan withdrawal. You know, Kamala Harris doesn't get to throw her predecessor under the bus. And so all of the things that Joe Biden has been responsible and the failures for will be directly tied to Kamala Harris. And she'll have to articulate and explain why she isn't responsible as then the vice president, potentially the leader of her party going forward.
Do you think it would be easier to run against Harris than against Biden, Corey?
You know, Michael, I'll say this. Joe Biden and Donald Trump both have a record that the American people are acutely aware of. Donald Trump spent 4 years in the White House. Joe Biden has now spent 3.5. The difference with Kamala Harris is, while she is the vice president of the United States, I think to a large portion of the population, she's still an unknown commodity. Most people don't really know her background or her story per se, and haven't really seen her under those bright lights. So it's a very different campaign as opposed to running really what is a campaign against two incumbents. This would be a different trajectory, but I have enormous faith. I know the leadership team of this campaign, Susie Wiles, Chris LaCivita. I've worked with them all for many, many, many years. And I know that if Kamala Harris is the Democratic nominee, the Trump campaign will be prepared to bring that message about her failures directly to the American people.
The Republican platform this cycle has moved in places to the center on some issues. It's for the first time in 40 years. It doesn't call for a federal ban on abortion. It doesn't say that a marriage means a union between a man and a woman. What do you make of that?
Well, look, here's what President Trump has said. He says that our states are the laboratories of democracy, and the states should have the right to decide what the life laws look like in their respective locations. And what that means is people get to vote on it by and large. I think there's 17 states across the country that have this issue on the ballot right now, and the people get to decide. And what people do in New York or California could be very different than what people decide in Mississippi or Kentucky. But even in those conservative states, the states like Ohio, who've seen the issue of life on the ballot, you know, there has not been a vote by the general population to have an absolute ban. If that's how the people of those states want to govern themselves, then that's how it should be. And that's what the purpose of Roe v. Wade was not to ban abortion in states, but to turn it back to those states. And so I think this notion of a federal ban and not being in the platform is smart, because it returns the power back to the states where it should be in the first place.
Corey, thanks for joining us. That's all the time we have. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for spending time today with us.
You bet. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for watching. For more of these conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription. Get a free trial by visiting WashingtonPostLive.com. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm Michael Duffy.